The journey to New Avalon pushed the Raven to its limits. Murloc felt the vibrations through the hull as the engines strained. When they finally emerged from their final warp jump, the sight before him stole his breath. New Avalon was a sprawling marvel of engineering. Massive habitat rings spun lazily around a central hub, easily twice the size of any space station Murloc had ever encountered. Holographic displays flickered between the structures, a constant dance of information and light. Murloc's mandibles clicked in astonishment. This level of investment in infrastructure was unheard of in WAG space. They rushed Rhea through pristine corridors surrounded by technology that defied Murloc's understanding. Suddenly, alarms blared. A voice rang out, "Hull breach detected in Sector 7." Murloc watched in awe as bulkheads slammed shut, containing the breach. Repair drones swarmed to the damaged area, patching the hull with startling speed. A doctor, relief evident on his face, clasped Murloc's shoulder. "Your AI just saved countless lives. Thank you." When Rhea finally emerged from her final procedure, pale but alive, Murloc felt a surge of emotion he couldn't name. Yelena approached him, genuine warmth in her eyes. "You've given this young woman a future," she said softly. "I hope you understand what a precious gift that is." The Raven glided smoothly into the docking bay of the damaged space station, its hull gleaming under the harsh artificial lights. Murloc guided the ship with practiced ease, his fingers dancing across the control panel. As the airlock hissed open, a burly human with grease-stained coveralls strode forward. "Marcus Hawkins," he introduced himself, extending a calloused hand. "Chief Engineer, you've got our new core?" Murloc nodded, gesturing towards the ship's cargo hold. "Secured and ready for transfer." "I understand your mission took some unexpected turns," Boyd began, her piercing gaze fixed on Murloc. For the next hour, Murloc recounted the events of his journey, the pirate attack on Cadron, the injured colonists, the marvels of New Avalon. With each revelation, Boyd's expression shifted from surprise to grudging respect. Murloc's antenna twitched. Perhaps they were more alike than either of their species realized. As the station's systems hummed back to life, Murloc took a moment to reflect on the strange journey that had brought him here. The WAG, once so certain of their superiority, had been humbled. And Murloc, once dismissive of human technology, had found himself relying on it and the humans who created it more than he had ever imagined. But their newfound understanding was about to be tested. The peace was shattered when an urgent communication arrived from WAG High Command. "Murloc," the transmission began, the voice cold and authoritative. "Your actions have been noted. You are to return immediately for debriefing and reassignment." Murloc's antennae twitched in frustration. He knew what that meant: interrogation, isolation, and likely punishment for fraternizing with the humans. Yet, as he glanced at the human crew, now working side by side with WAG engineers to stabilize the station, he realized that something fundamental had changed within him. He wasn't the same WAG pilot who had sneered at the thought of human collaboration. Back on WAG Prime, Murloc faced a tribunal of his superiors, their compound eyes fixed on him with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. "You have acted outside the boundaries of your mission," one of them intoned. "Your fraternization with the humans is unacceptable. How do you plead?" Murloc stood tall, his mandibles clicking defiantly. "I plead guilty," he said. "Guilty of discovering that there is more to the galaxy than we have been led to believe. The humans, primitive as we thought them, have shown me a side of ourselves we've long forgotten. Curiosity, resilience, and the ability to adapt in ways we cannot comprehend." The tribunal members exchanged glances, their rigid expressions cracking ever so slightly. "Your punishment will be severe," the head of the tribunal finally said. "But your insights, they warrant further investigation. You will be reassigned to a joint WAG human task force. Perhaps there is something to be learned from these primitives after all." As Murloc left the tribunal chamber, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief mixed with anticipation. The galaxy was changing, and he would be at the forefront of that change. He returned to the Raven, where Boyd awaited him. "So, what's the verdict?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes searching. Murloc sighed. "Reassigned to a joint task force. They're not happy about it, but they see the potential in what we've started." Boyd nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Welcome to the team, Murloc." Let's see what we can accomplish together. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, briefings, and joint exercises. Murloc found himself in the unique position of being both a bridge and a barrier between two species that had only just begun to understand each other. He was acutely aware of the mistrust on both sides, the whispered doubts, and the unspoken fears. But he also saw the potential for something greater, a collaboration that could push the boundaries of what either species had ever imagined. The first test of their newfound alliance came sooner than expected. A distress signal from a remote human outpost on the fringes of WAG space had gone unanswered for days, and a joint task force was quickly assembled to investigate. As the Raven led the fleet towards the outpost, Murloc couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The outpost was eerily silent, its communications array dark and unresponsive. As they drew closer, the reason for the silence became horrifyingly clear. The outpost had been attacked, its defenses overwhelmed by an unknown enemy. The once bustling colony was now a graveyard, its structures reduced to smoldering ruins and its inhabitants gone. The task force quickly landed, securing the area and beginning the grim task of searching for survivors. Murloc moved through the ruins with Boyd at his side, their steps echoing in the desolate silence. "Who could have done this?" Boyd muttered, her voice tinged with anger. "And why?" Murloc's antennae twitched as he scanned the area. The damage was too extensive, too precise to be the work of mere raiders or pirates. This was something else, something far more dangerous. "We need to find out what happened here," Murloc said, his voice low, "before it happens again." As they delved deeper into the ruins, they discovered signs of a fierce battle, scorch marks from energy weapons, and strange, unfamiliar symbols etched into the walls. The symbols were unlike anything Murloc had ever seen, their jagged lines and angular shapes seeming to pulse with a malevolent energy. "These markings," Boyd said, tracing her fingers over them, "they're not from any known species. We need to get this data back to the fleet for analysis." But as they made their way back to the Raven, the ground beneath them trembled, and the air filled with an eerie hum. The ruins around them began to shift and distort, as if reality itself was warping. "Move!" Boyd shouted, but it was too late. The ground beneath them gave way, and they were plunged into darkness. When Murloc regained consciousness, he found himself in a vast underground chamber, the walls pulsing with a sickly green light. Boyd lay beside him, unconscious but breathing. As he struggled to his feet, he realized with a sinking feeling that they were not alone. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form obscured by the dim light. It was humanoid in shape, but twisted and wrong, its limbs elongated and its skin a mottled gray. It spoke in a voice that was both grating and melodic, a sound that made Murloc's exoskeleton crawl. "Welcome, interlopers. You have wandered into the domain of the Sovereign." Murloc's mandibles clicked in frustration. This was not what he had expected. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the cavernous chamber. The figure laughed, a sound that echoed off the walls like 1,000 tiny knives. "I am the voice of the Sovereign, the harbinger of the end. Your kind, both human and WAG, are nothing but insects, scurrying about in the dark, unaware of the storm that is coming." Murloc's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was hearing. The Sovereign, who or what were they? And what did they want? "We have no quarrel with you," Murloc said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're just here to investigate what happened to the outpost." The outpost, the voice sneered, was merely a test, a prelude to the real event. The Sovereign have slumbered for millennia, waiting for the right moment to awaken. That moment is now. Boyd stirred beside him, groaning as she regained consciousness. "Murloc, what's happening?" she muttered, her voice thick with pain. "We need to get out of here," Murloc said, helping her to her feet. "Now." But the voice laughed again, a sound that sent shivers down Murloc's spine. "There is no escape. The Sovereign will rise, and your pitiful alliance will be crushed beneath their might. The galaxy will be cleansed, and from the ashes a new order will emerge." Before Murloc could respond, the chamber began to tremble, the walls cracking and crumbling as the ground shook violently. "Go!" Murloc shouted, pushing Boyd towards the exit. They ran, the chamber collapsing around them, the voices' laughter following them as they fled. They emerged into the ruins, the ground still shaking as the structure behind them collapsed into a heap of rubble. The Raven was waiting, its engines humming with readiness. "Get us out of here!" Murloc shouted as they boarded, the ship lifting off just as the ground beneath it gave way. As they streaked away from the outpost, Murloc's mind raced. The Sovereign, whoever they were, had awakened, and their intentions were clear. The galaxy was on the brink of a new war, one that could devastate everything Murloc had fought to protect. "We need to warn the fleet," Boyd said, her voice grim. "This is bigger than anything we've faced before." Murloc nodded, his thoughts dark. The peace they had worked so hard to build was fragile, and now it was under threat from an enemy they barely understood. The journey back to the fleet was tense, the weight of their discovery hanging over them like a dark cloud. When they arrived, they were met with a flurry of activity as the fleet prepared for the inevitable conflict. Murloc and Boyd quickly briefed the fleet commanders on what they had discovered, the room growing colder with each revelation. "This Sovereign," one of the commanders muttered. "They sound like something out of a nightmare." "They are," Murloc agreed, "and they're coming for us all." The fleet quickly mobilized, their ships spreading out to cover as much ground as possible. Murloc found himself back in the Raven, Boyd by his side as they prepared for what was to come. "This is it," Boyd said quietly as they strapped in. "This is what we've been fighting for." Murloc nodded, his resolve hardening. "We can't let them win. Not now, not ever." The first signs of the Sovereign's advance came in the form of strange, twisted ships. Their designs unlike anything in the fleet's databases. They moved with a grace that was almost eerie, their weapon systems pulsing with an unnatural light. The battle was fierce, the fleet struggling to hold the line against the Sovereign's relentless assault. Murloc pushed the Raven to its limits, darting between enemy ships, his reflexes honed to a razor's edge. But the Sovereign were unlike any enemy they had faced before. Their ships moved with a fluidity that defied logic, their weapons cutting through the fleet's defenses with terrifying efficiency. Murloc watched in horror as ship after ship was torn apart, their debris scattering across the battlefield. "We're losing," Boyd muttered, her voice tinged with despair. "We can't hold them off." But Murloc refused to give up. "There has to be a way," he said, his mind racing. "Astra, scan their ships for any weaknesses. Anything we can use." "Scanning," Astra replied, her tone as calm as ever despite the chaos. "Analysis complete. The Sovereign's ships are powered by a central core, heavily shielded but vulnerable to concentrated energy bursts." "Then that's what we'll do," Murloc said, his voice filled with determination. "Target their cores. If we can take out their power source, we can stop them." The fleet quickly adjusted their tactics, focusing their fire on the Sovereign's cores. One by one, the enemy ships began to falter, their movements slowing as their power drained away. The tide of battle began to turn, the fleet pushing the Sovereign back, their determination renewed. But just as victory seemed within reach, the largest of the Sovereign's ships emerged from the darkness, its size dwarfing anything in the fleet. It moved with a terrifying grace, its weapons cutting through the fleet with brutal precision. Murloc felt a chill run down his spine as the ship turned its attention to the Raven, its weapons charging for a final devastating blow. "Astra, evasive maneuvers," Murloc shouted, the ship lurching to the side as the enemy's weapons fired. The Raven narrowly avoided the blast, but the shock wave sent them spiraling out of control. "We can't outrun it," Boyd said, her voice filled with dread. "It's too powerful." Murloc's mind raced as he searched for a solution, his thoughts turning to the Raven's experimental technology. "Astra, initiate the overdrive sequence." "We're going to ram it." "Overdrive initiated," Astra replied, her tone as calm as ever. "Impact in 10 seconds." Murloc braced himself as the Raven's engines roared to life, the ship hurtling towards the Sovereign's flagship. The distance closed rapidly, the enemy ship's weapons firing desperately in an attempt to stop them. But it was too late. The Raven slammed into the Sovereign's ship with a deafening crash, the impact sending shock waves through both vessels. The enemy ship's core overloaded, a blinding explosion tearing through its hull. The last thing Murloc saw before everything went dark was the Sovereign's ship breaking apart, its pieces scattering across the void. When Murloc awoke, he was floating in the Raven's cockpit, the ship's systems offline. Boyd lay beside him, unconscious but alive. The battlefield was eerily silent, the remains of both fleets drifting in the darkness. Astra, status report, Murloc muttered, his voice weak. Systems offline, Astra replied, her tone faint. Severe damage sustained. Life support failing. Murloc's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out. But as he looked out at the battlefield, at the countless lives lost in the struggle, he realized that there was no way out. They had won, but at a terrible cost. The Sovereign were defeated, but the galaxy would never be the same. As darkness closed in around him, Murloc felt a strange sense of peace. They had fought for something greater than themselves, and in the end, they had prevailed. When Murloc awoke again, he was aboard a medical ship, the sterile white walls a stark contrast to the chaos of the battlefield. Boyd sat beside him, her face pale but relieved. "You're awake," she said, her voice filled with emotion. We made it." Murloc nodded weakly, his body aching. "What happened?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The fleet! What's left of it anyway? Managed to pull you out," Boyd explained, her voice wavering. "We lost a lot of good people, but we won. The Sovereign are gone." Murloc closed his eyes, the weight of their victory settling heavily on his shoulders. They had won, but at what cost? The galaxy was safe, but the scars of the battle would linger for generations. "What now?" he muttered, his voice filled with exhaustion. Boyd smiled faintly, her eyes filled with determination. "Now we rebuild. We honor the fallen and make sure this never happens again." Murloc nodded, his resolve returning. They had fought for something greater than themselves, and now it was time to ensure that their sacrifice was not in vain. As he drifted back into unconsciousness, he knew that the galaxy was in good hands. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they would face it together, as allies, as friends, and as survivors of a war that had changed them all. Murloc's recovery was slow, his body bearing the physical toll of the battle, but his mind never rested. Every waking moment was filled with thoughts of the Sovereign, their twisted technology, and the devastation they had wrought. The galaxy had seen conflicts before, but nothing on the scale or with the existential threat that the Sovereign had posed. As he regained his strength, Murloc was constantly debriefed by the Joint Human-WAG Command. They dissected every detail of the battle, analyzing weaknesses, studying the wreckage, and searching for any remnants of the Sovereign threat. It was during these sessions that Murloc began to realize that while the immediate threat was over, the implications of the conflict were far from resolved. The Sovereign had left behind more than just physical scars. Their existence, their very nature, had revealed a terrifying truth. The galaxy was far more dangerous and complex than either humans or WAG had ever imagined. Their technology, their power to warp reality itself, hinted at the existence of other ancient, possibly dormant, threats scattered throughout the cosmos. Murloc knew that if the galaxy was to survive, they would need to be prepared. He pushed himself harder in his recovery, driven by the knowledge that their fight was not yet over. As soon as he was able, Murloc returned to the Raven, now heavily damaged, but still a symbol of their victory. Engineers and technicians swarmed over the ship, working tirelessly to repair and upgrade its systems. Murloc spent long hours in the cockpit, refamiliarizing himself with the controls, going over battle simulations, and planning for the future. Boyd often joined him, her presence a steadying influence in the chaotic aftermath. They spoke little, but there was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond forged in the fires of battle. Months passed, and the galaxy slowly began to recover. The joint task force between humans and WAG had proven to be more successful than anyone had anticipated. The once mistrustful allies had grown to respect each other, working together to secure the galaxy from any further threats. New alliances were formed, old rivalries set aside in the face of a common enemy. But even as the galaxy began to rebuild, there was an undercurrent of unease. The Sovereign had been defeated, but the mystery of their origins remained unsolved. Where had they come from? Were there more of them, lurking in the dark corners of the galaxy? And what other dangers awaited them, hidden in the vastness of space? These questions haunted Murlock as he prepared to embark on a new mission. The fleet had received disturbing reports from the Outer Rim, strange energy readings, unexplained disappearances, and whispers of a new, unseen enemy. The galaxy's leaders had decided that they could not afford to ignore these threats. A new expedition was to be launched, one that would take them into the farthest reaches of space, beyond the boundaries of known space, into the unknown. Murlock was given command of the expedition, his reputation as a battle-hardened leader making him the natural choice. Boyd would serve as his second-in-command, her expertise in human technology invaluable in their mission. The Raven, now fully repaired and outfitted with the latest in both human and WAG technology, would lead the fleet. Murlock felt a mix of anticipation and trepidation as the day of departure approached. The mission would be dangerous, perhaps more so than anything they had faced before, but it was necessary. The galaxy could not afford to be caught off guard again. The day of departure arrived, and the fleet assembled in orbit around New Avalon. The sight of the massive ships, bristling with weapons and technology, filled Murlock with a sense of pride and responsibility. He knew that the fate of the galaxy might well rest on the success of their mission. As the countdown began, Murlock took one last look at the world below, its surface still scarred from the recent conflict, but slowly healing. He knew that they were leaving behind a fragile peace, one that could be shattered at any moment. But he also knew that they were the galaxy's best hope. The fleet's engines roared to life, and one by one the ships leaped into hyperspace, their destination the edge of the galaxy. The journey was long and uneventful at first, the vastness of space stretching out before them. But as they approached the outer rim, the strange energy readings began to intensify. The ship's sensors struggled to make sense of the data, the readings fluctuating wildly as if space itself was distorting around them. Murlock ordered the fleet to drop out of hyperspace, and they emerged into a region of space unlike anything they had seen before. The stars were dim, their light obscured by a strange, shimmering haze that seemed to permeate everything. The ship's sensors were nearly useless, the strange energy disrupting their systems. "What is this?" Boyd muttered, her voice tinged with unease. "It's like space is warping." Murlock's mandibles clicked as he studied the readings. "It's the same energy signature as the Sovereign," he said grimly, "but different. More chaotic, more unstable." The fleet moved cautiously through the region, their sensors scanning for any signs of danger. The strange energy continued to disrupt their systems, but there was no sign of an enemy. The tension on the bridge was palpable, the crew on edge as they waited for something, anything, to happen. And then, without warning, the sensors went wild. Alarms blared as the ship's systems struggled to make sense of the data. Murlock's eyes widened as he saw the readings. Multiple ships, massive in size, closing in on their position. "Battle stations!" he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Prepare for engagement." The fleet scrambled to respond, their weapons charging as the enemy ships appeared on the view screen. They were unlike anything Murlock had ever seen. Twisted, organic-looking vessels that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. They moved with an eerie grace, their weapons charging as they closed in on the fleet. The battle that followed was brutal and chaotic. The enemy ships moved with a fluidity that defied logic, their weapons tearing through the fleet's defenses with terrifying efficiency. Murlock pushed the Raven to its limits, darting between enemy ships, his reflexes honed to a razor's edge. But the enemy was relentless, their numbers overwhelming. The fleet was being torn apart, ship after ship reduced to debris in the dark void of space, but Murlock refused to give up. He knew that the fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. As the battle raged on, he spotted a weakness in the enemy's formation, a small gap in their defenses, just large enough for a ship to slip through. "Boyd, take the helm," he ordered, his mind racing. "We're going in." Boyd didn't hesitate, her hands moving over the controls as she guided the Raven towards the gap. The enemy ships closed in around them, their weapons firing in a desperate attempt to stop them. But Boyd was too quick, the Raven slipping through the gap and into the heart of the enemy formation. The sight that greeted them was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. At the center of the enemy fleet was a massive structure, pulsating with energy, its design unlike anything Murloc had ever seen. It was clearly the source of the strange energy readings, and Murloc knew that if they could destroy it, they could cripple the enemy fleet. "Astra, target that structure," Murloc ordered, his voice filled with determination. "We need to take it out no matter the cost."